I'd wager, though, that the costs are differentially allocated towards the special education students there.
Yes.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yes.
And again, in looking at this, staff simply looked at comparable programs in the area, what they charged, given the fact that there is no before or after care, and it is a shorter day. And so I worked with Ms. Germer on that, and so I trust her judgment in the recommendations.
I don't think the tuition is necessarily out of line. I do think that we have to be careful that we are providing the right education to the kids who are there, because I've got personal experience there, and I'm not going to go into it, but I'm not going to spend $7,000 next year to send my child there. Okay, and I wouldn't spend $5,000 either. So I think you have to figure out, are we going to provide, what kind of education? If you're going to raise my tuition $2,000 next year, I want to make sure that if my child is there as a typical peer, they're getting the education they need, the value, and they're getting the same education they would get, and they're going to be prepared for kindergarten in the same way they would be if they were at a different school. Because then there are other costs associated with sending your child there, because you have to get extra support to make sure they're prepared to go to kindergarten. So if we're not going to provide that kind of support for the typical peer students there, I don't think that we can charge parents more money to have their kids there just to support. And I love the philosophy of an inclusive preschool. I really do. And I love all the intangibles my son gets there. But I think it's also important to make sure that kids are learning their numbers and their letters and their shapes when they're in the 3 and 4 year old classes. And if I'm paying $7,000 and not getting that, I'm not going to be a very happy parent.
Other comments about this?
I don't disagree with what Ms. Gill is saying.
And I'm sorry, I apologize. It's hard for me to separate my personal experience from this, but I think it's valuable to somebody. I'm not going to, I'm not speaking in a. I've got a typical peer student there, and he's been there for 2 years. So I have a very good experience at that preschool. And I think the teachers and staff there are wonderful, and they do everything they possibly can. So this is not a knock on them at all.
My experiences were with other local preschools, a couple of them. I'm not so sure that in all preschools, in every case, the ball's getting hit out of the park. But what I'd say is, I think we clearly need to have more resources at Jessie Thackeray. I think the actual tuition seems low for the market. And so I think regardless of whether we raise the tuition, we ought to make sure that we're spending enough at Jessie Thackeray so both the special education and the typical peers get the education that they want and deserve. And I think to help finance that, it's appropriate to charge an amount equivalent with what is being charged otherwise. So, $6,500 or $7,000 seems reasonable to me. I think we ought to make sure we've got a good program at Jessie Thackeray. And I think there are some challenges that probably go with typical peers that they might not face at a preschool that didn't have such a large percentage of special needs kids. But there are also significant advantages because you have certified teachers, which is often not the case in preschool. So it's a mixture of things, and I think being in that environment can help kids in a lot of other ways too. So my inclination, as I said, would be to raise the tuition, to help and to use that money without using the term earmark, but make sure that we are
adequately funding material supplies and
adequately funding the preschool,
school,
of which materials and school supplies is a part.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important for every student there, no matter their needs.
Mr. Zale.
I guess we come back to a threshold question with respect to the staffing and other budgetary inputs that you initially made, Dr. Schiller, with respect to, on a building-by-building basis, are you comfortable about the existing resourcing requests for Jessie Thackeray? Is there anything we don't know about that we should?
I'd like to defer that till next week, give me a chance to go back and look at it very seriously.
Okay.
and deeply. I'll be over there with the faculty myself on Thursday as it is. It'll give me an opportunity. I'm meeting with the faculty. Give me an opportunity to get some more firsthand information. So if I might indulge a few more days to look at that. But I think the point that I hear around this table, which I would just underscore, is that all of our students, all of our schools, no matter the grade, no matter tuition or non-tuition, we need to assure that all of the students and all the schools, all the facilities are adequately staffed and adequately supplied so that the top flight services will extend as a hallmark of our district. I don't think any board member disagrees with that. It's just a matter that you're going to be now, after we do our wrap-up tonight, facing heavy policy decisions of allocations of limited resources. And that's what it's going to come down to. We'll make our recommendations when you ask us to make our recommendations. But the key is going to be that how are you going to now take the limited resources with all the myriad of data we've developed for you and that we all know are all needs, or how do we go forward to access and try to find additional resources to satisfy the needs of the salary, the needs of the staffing, the needs of the mandate, the needs of the schools, the materials. These are hard decisions that this board is facing.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just as a follow-up, I agree with Mr. Reidinger's sentiment about the tuition of $6,500 or $7,000. I would also say we should not waste any time in doing the same with respect to George Mason. If we know that we're not charging what the cost is, well, let's fix that now. And I would also agree that we do need to look at the needs of every student, and we as a board need to approach the needs of every student as board members and dispassionately so that we realize we are thinking about a division of 2,700 children.
I'm trying to turn over every rock and ask every question that I could possibly ask because this gives you a fresh look at the budget. And staff has been remarkable in responding. Now, we may not have all the details in the right format that you want, but I think you can understand that we want to make sure, as you've said throughout, this is a transparent process and that you have everything laid out before you so that we can then wrestle through hard decisions. And so where we've fallen short, we'll want to know how we can better provide with you. But I think we're trying to ask the harder questions and some of the things, instead of assuming that we'll always do what we've always done, I'm asking why are we doing what we're doing, when we're doing it, and how we're doing it. And that's why we're putting this out for you.
Mr. Nkrumah?
I just want to inject a little bit of market dynamics into this George Mason and JTP thing. It's one thing, asking for, or should I say bluntly, jacking up the fees. But what does that do to demand? I mean, does that, taking it from 18 to 21, does that deter certain parents from saying, look, they're just about good schools in surrounding jurisdictions, and therefore I'll just send the kid to a public school in Arlington rather than, I could do 18, but 21, 22, now I'm in college tuition territory, do I want to do this? Versus, sort of looking at, you anticipating what, maybe a few more and you got less this year. Is that what's going to happen when we send it up to 22? I just want us to think about that, and I don't know if there's a way to determine that. And to Ms. Gill's point, 5,000 is one thing. 7,000, I want some value, and for me, my motto is price is only relevant in the absence of value. If we're not getting value, then what are we paying for? If you think a Mercedes does something for you, you buy it. On the other hand, you could go buy yourself a Toyota and say it does the same thing because that's the value you apportion to it. So let's understand what we're doing here when we set these prices. I'm just throwing it out. Okay.
And I'll say to Mr. Castillo's point, I am being my children are not going to be there next year. I'm not paying this tuition next year. So I'm thinking about the other kids who will be there. I'm thinking about all the students. It's not my kids. My kids aren't going to be there. So I am thinking about what this preschool is going to be going forward and how we're going to serve every student there, and they're going to go forward in our division.
If I might respond briefly, sir, to Chairman, to Mr. Nkuma, I think, the market question is an exceedingly good one. I just don't think we can answer it, really. We've asked that question before, and I would think I was told the last time I asked it that there was always a waiting list for people to get into Jesse Thackeray, and that it sounds, at least from the anecdotal evidence we've got, like there is. We're not driving people away with cost at George Mason right now. Instead, we're limited by what the statute allows. I don't know a way to find out more, and I think at this point, given the need, to go back to what Mr. Castillo said, to make a decision, I think I'd prefer to pull the trigger and, get this put behind us and move forward, and then in the future, if we turn out to have a problem, we can always adjust back, but I'd rather... my bias towards decision making leads me to say, let's just make a decision.
That's fair.
As unsatisfying as that is.
No, that's fair. That's very fair. And I don't know the answers either, but I'm just saying we should think about it while we're in our deliberations.
And two pieces of information. I thank you for reminding us about the waiting list at JTP. I do know in the past when we increased tuition at George Mason, because it used to be quite a bit lower than this. There was one family in particular, and I think that they had two students going there, and they threw up their hands and said, you know what, no, I can't afford this, and whatever. I will also say that there's a fair number, and continues to be a fair number, of students whose tuition is being paid by the World Bank or an embassy, and where it's not the parents who are, ultimately having to foot the bill. I just simply have to fill out the paperwork and certify that, in fact, yes, we received this amount of tuition. So that doesn't help at all. But
No, I'm just.
As an experiment in demand elasticity, I guess one of the things I would look at is, so where else are you going to go? And private schools, price tags still make 21.8 or whatever it is, a screaming deal. And so I think it'll be interesting to find out. I don't think we're gouging at that price. We're covering our costs, maybe. And so I think, well, to the extent statutorily allowed, but I think we should charge as much as we think is feasible, and I think this is reasonable. So,
Mr. Lawrence.
Just a couple things. First, if we're concerned about people who are there now suddenly having their fees go up, we can also grandfather whoever has a kid at GM and
Fantastic
say,
idea.
You pay this until your kid leaves, and then anybody new coming in pays a different amount. I mean, that's not very unusual at all, and it would be fair because, let's face it, you don't put your kid into high school thinking they're only going to stay there for 2 years unless you're moving somewhere, fairly far away. Mm-hmm. I've got no problem increasing tuition at Thackeray, but what we can't do is say we're going to do it knowing that we're going to fill all the needs that they brought to us, because all the needs that the schools brought to us equaled, what, 2.5 million?
and that's the staff component.
Right. And
Not 2.5 million at Thackeray, right?
No,
No,
total.
overall.
Right.
I mean, we have to look at the whole school division. So what we can't do is say, we're going to fill what Thackeray brought to us now, and then everybody else is going to get cut, because we can't afford 2.5 million. And then that's on top of, another 900,000 for all the stuff that we have to do. So what the teachers, what the buildings brought us, we can't afford. So what we can't do is be unfair to everybody else by saying, well, we're going to raise tuition at Thackeray, but we're going to guarantee we're going to fill the requests that you brought, but we're not going to say that for others. So if we're going to raise it, okay, let's raise it, but let's not prejudge how we're going to divide up the cuts, because there are going to be cuts and they're going to be big. We can't say Jesse Thackeray is going to be held harmless. We can do our best. We can try to cut as little as possible, but I don't think it's fair to the rest of the schools to say, here we are at budget session 2, congratulations, Thackeray, you just won the lottery, and you're fully funded, and everybody else, you've got to start fighting for what's left.
Can I stop the grandfathering? If you're there are kids there who are 2 and 3 whose parents, they also need to know right away if their tuition's going up by $2,000, because that may make a decision for them on whether they're going to keep their kid there next year. They need to be able to apply now for preschool for next year. I know the day school's application is due Friday.
May I throw out one other option, which since we're
The grandfather them in too, or you let them know like tomorrow that their tuition's going up.
and this is from an administrative standpoint of trying to have people paying tuition in various categories or whatever. There's another possible strategy would be to maybe not ratchet it up the whole amount, but phase it in over 2 or 3 years, which might have a similar effect to grandfathering, because honestly, I know at least George Mason, the tuition has not changed for 5 or 6 years. So that has remained stagnant. Just throwing it out there.
Okay. So it sounds to me like some sort of hybrid, and whether we grandfather or whether we at least we stagger it. So do we use a percentage, some sort of inflation adjustment, or a certain number for these folks? What do we do? Is this something we could decide now, or would you come back to us with some ideas?
I would hope you would decide this evening.
I guess we have to answer this evening. Mr. Castillo?
If I may, I think we should remind ourselves our obligation is to provide a high-quality, free education to the K-12 population in the city of Falls Church. To the extent we're educating people who are outside of that, I think that's great, but I think we need to keep our eyes on the ball as to what our core mission is. And if we are not charging and not recovering the full costs, then we are doing a disservice to the people whose interests we are bound to protect. So I don't willy-nilly want to impose cost increases on people, but in the scheme of things, I think that is preferable to some of the alternatives that are coming out here.
Well, but the cost increases aren't just for non-residents when it comes to Thackeray, though.
Well, but to the extent that there is, we don't have an obligation to provide free preschool to everybody, to all
non-special needs
comers.
kids, right?
And so, again, if we can do incremental things over and above our core mission, that's great. But I think we need to remain focused on what it is that we're charged with doing first and foremost, and then deal with other things later.
Yeah, towards that end is, did you have something to say, Mr. Did you?
Just clarification, unless Virginia is different, you do have an obligation to provide a free and appropriate education for special need children
Yes,
at preschool.
no, absolutely.
Right.
No,
Yeah,
no,
I
no.
mean, I don't want someone out there to believe that we are,
Well,
Oh, no.
No, he was talking about tuition for
And-
general ed,
and the
Yes,
other
but-
not
yeah.
special ed.
yes, okay.
The other piece I would add, and I would like to think I'm channeling Liz Germer here, and if I'm not, please forgive me, but my understanding from Liz and also from Kathy Aleko when this program was over at Mount Daniel is, in reality, the typical peers bring value to the program themselves simply by being there.
Yes.
So it's not that they're like draining on the program, they're actually enriching the educational experience for the students for whom we are required to provide services. So just wanted to throw that
Yeah, and
out
I think that's why the program was set up that way, because it is important for those typical peers. That's the special needs students get to witness the behavior of them, and it's almost like they're their little tutors. But towards as far as tuition goes, I mean, can we have 2 phases, like new people coming in have the increased tuition? I'm not necessarily talking about the preschool at this point. And then for those who are currently maybe have a slight increase every year, just like cost of living increase, cost increase, whatever.
Ultimately, we can do whatever you
Yeah, but I
want
mean,
us to do.
just in order to be fair, I think personally we should increase our tuition to be commensurate with what we are paying now for our students, and we also should increase. But the current students. I'm sorry, it's after 9. I'm getting tired. Increase them, but not at that same
The
level.
full amount, yes. Do a phase in.
Just like any other thing that increases every year, any other kind of tuition. And then I don't know what to say about Thackeray. That's an enigma to me right now. I can't. Thank you.
Based on the numbers, you've got 31 preschool students paying $5,000, 11 at the high school paying $18,000. That's $353,000 a year. I would not want to give them a disincentive not to come back. I would rather keep this money. Maybe the new ones, I would vote. Let me put it this way: I'd vote for new kids, charge them more. These ones we hold or we slow down some increase. I'm happy to grandfather these so we can at least keep this, and then add the new ones. That would be my vote. So
Grandfather with,
grandfather them
with the slight increase to cover
it
costs.
wouldn't hurt. I'd support just grandfathering them and say to hell, next year or
raise
something.
it
But
each year, just like every preschool raises their tuition every year. So, and I don't know, private schools as well, raise the tuition each year.
So, I'm not sure if this disagrees with you or not, Ms. Ward. I agree with Mr. Castillo about the high school. If kids are coming here and they're not Falls Church City residents, then we ought to charge what is appropriate, and I think we ought to go to the full amount that the statute allows for the high school immediately for all students. Let me finish. Please.
Okay. No.
For Jesse Thackeray, those are, I mean, the typical peers are Falls Church kids. As you said, there's a difficult balance there. I could see either grandfathering, current people paying, or I could see ratcheting up slowly and saying instead of going to 7,000, let's go to 6,000 and see what happens. My mind is by no means made up. I'm very much drawn to Hunter's concern about trying to grandfather some and not all, because I know from similar circumstances in non-education businesses, that's a nightmare to manage for a small school system. So my gut would be to ratchet up the preschool amount, but maybe not to the full 7,000, and take the high school to the amount that we're allowed, because it doesn't even cover our costs. It's not like we're gouging anybody. It's what our costs are minus all the things we're going to have to do for capital. So I think it's utterly fair to charge tuition students the amount that we're legally allowed to charge, which is actually less than our cost. And so that would be my preference.
Any other questions or comments? And for me on this, I agree with both Mr. Castillo and Mr. Ranger. At the high school, I do think making it the move up to the full cost, because it does not match what we ultimately pay for those students who are attending our schools. And unlike Thomas Jefferson, that can charge capital costs because to accommodate that, we are not able to do that. So I do think charging at least the statute allowable for the high school is, I think, the proper and right thing to do. With regards to Thackeray, I tend to lean more towards more of a phased process for the parents who are here. I think an increase, but I think phased. With any new student coming in, there should be that full, the $7,000. I think, as Mr. Lawrence said, I think going into that, we have to recognize the fact that we have several buildings and they all have needs, and we need to be balanced about how we approach this, because we have very limited resources that we currently have and will be receiving. So I think we do need to look at it at an across the division approach to how we are dispersing those funds. But I think with a phased approach, with some level of increase for current parents and letting them know that in advance that we will be doing that. But any new parent that would be coming in, that we do go to the full, I believe with 7,000 would be market.
And the parents are expecting an increase. We just don't know. We haven't told them what it is, and they actually were aware of this at the end of last year as well. So
May I ask a
not going
clarifying
to come as a
question?
horrible shock.
Certainly.
How long do students go to Jesse Thackeray as a general matter? How many years?
2.
Generally, 2.
So when we talk about phasing, we're talking about what? We're talking, there'll be complete turnover in 2 years.
1 year.
I'm just saying,
Does
but
that change how we approach the issue?
Yeah, I mean, phasing for a 2-year school doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you grandfather who's there so that the next year they would pay the same thing, and then they'd be gone, and then everybody.
And for the
new would
next
pay
2
something.
years.
Otherwise, you're just making Hunter's life miserable, which is fine, but would.
Hey,
So we have
Well-
two groups. We have people who are coming for the first time, and we have people who are coming for the second year.
correct.
Yeah, because only tuition-paying students only go, there are no 2-year-old tuition-paying students. Only special needs students can be 2-year-olds there. So it's only 3 and 4-year-olds, and the 4-year-olds are going to Mount Daniel.
But even I think if
So it's only the
for
3-year-old
those parents who are
class.
those parents of students who are coming back for next year being there last year, I think if they were anywhere else, they would be getting some type of increase in their cost. So I think we definitely still should do that, but we don't have to take it to the full $7,000. But I think they should, if they were anywhere else, they would be paying additional cost. Where the parents that we put out there now that are coming for the full 2 years, that we're putting the full $7,000, if that's what we decide to do, the full $7,000 cost of that. But again, we need to recognize of hearing some of the comments tonight that we do our best, knowing that we have limited resources, to give those students, the peer students, a little bit better experience while they're attending Thackeray as well.
What can we do, 6,000 this year and then 7,000 next year? So everybody this year pays 6,000, including the people who are there. But those kids they only do that for 1 year, and they're out to Mount Daniel. And so the kids who are coming, and then the year after that it goes up to 7,000. So like you're kind of aware, like tuition, we're phasing this in this year. Tuition's going to go up to 6,000, and then the 19, 20 school year, it will be $7,000. And that helps you make the decision too, if you're coming in with a 3-year-old. I'm going to pay 6,000 this year. I know next year it's going to be 7,000, and then we're going to be on a regular increase schedule for inflation that you'd be on anyway. You know, $200 or $300.
I think that's the big thing, that we need to be on a schedule, opposed to going years without adjusting. And I don't know with regard to George Mason, if we can, with this being that it's a statute that limits us, if we can, once we hit the cap now, the 21 change, if we can at some point ever revisit that to make the effort to cover some of the costs that we take on when those students come on board. But it sounds like it's a state statute that limits us on that at this point, that we're well under.
Right, yeah.
Good, Dr. Schiller?
Yeah, I might add, those children who may be coming to our school next year, if they're looking at another school nearby, they're going to be looking at more money elsewhere to code for the year or two than if they come to us. So, as Ms. Germer and I discussed, if you take a look at the first regional comparison here, that would be roughly $6,800. A parent would make that determination. Do I go to that particular preschool or go to Thackeray? So someone coming in new, we're still a value. Still a value. And so I would think that you might want to be comparable to the marketplace at the very least for those coming in. What you want to do for someone who has been there for a year and is going to be there another for those numbers of children, that's where you could either grandfather or do a half step up.
Mr. Reininger?
So I'm just trying to put together a way to sort of do this. Would it generally satisfy people's desires if we said, well, it would be 1 year of extra work for Hunter? It would only be 1 year. So if we said statutory maximum for high school and middle school, recognizing, or for high school and before high school, recognizing that we don't have any students in that latter category. And then for Jesse Thackeray Preschool, we go to 7,000 or 6,500, whatever the group wants, but say that for 1 year only, we'll grandfather current year students and raise them just to 6,000.
I guess the one question I would have is, do we know, it sounds as if we don't actually know what the cost of educating the students is at Thackeray yet, because the number that we have is a market number, but we don't know what our actual costs are.
I did a real quick and dirty, knowing approximately their budget and divided by the number of students, about 10,500, based on my memory and knowing what the total Thackeray budget is divided by the 70-some students.
So I guess I would suggest that we should ascertain what our actual cost is at all schools in the division and charge that. Now, if we're out of the market on that, then we have to revisit that.
Most part.
In which case, we have to kind of
Well,
spitball it, as my
That's right.
sister would say.
Yeah, I
Well,
think
and-
Thackeray's a bit different because it is geared toward special needs heavily. So I think it would be a skewed cost that would,
and the
not-
program as it is currently designed needs the typical peers. So that they're really like a resource.
I think this tuition cost should be revisited each year.